Hello, everyone. I'm going to give everybody a few minutes to join. Just waiting a few minutes until everybody gets logged in. Welcome, everyone. I see we still have people logging in. I'm going to give them a few minutes. Welcome, everyone. I am Adam Lush, the Regional Resource Director for the Greater Philadelphia region. Thank you for joining us for the 15th installment of our webinar series, A View from the Mountain, Caron's Perspective on Addiction Treatment in the Wake of COVID-19. And today's topic, When Alcohol, Summer, COVID-19, and Teens Intersect. Today's presentation is eligible for 1 hour of social work continuing education credit. We would like to thank our educational sponsor, Jumana Grassi, for assisting in obtaining these credits. Please keep your Zoom session open at the end of the presentation to access the post-event evaluation to obtain your 1 hour credit. In order to receive your credit, you must stay on for the duration of the webinar. A certificate will be emailed to you from Jumana within the next 2 weeks. As a reminder, we will be conducting this session in webinar format. All participant microphones will be muted. During the presentation, please utilize the Q&A feature to ask any questions that you may have. Depending on the volume of questions, if we can't get to your question before the end of the hour, we will have someone from our team follow up with you directly. Now I'd like to welcome our speakers for today's presentation. Christine Storm is the Director of Community Education at Caron Treatment Centers. Since joining Caron in 2004, she has served as a specialist and lead specialist with the Student Assistance Program, then moved into a regional coordinator and regional director roles. She has overseen significant growth in the education department, especially in the Greater Philadelphia region. Kate Appelman is the Senior Clinical Director of Men's Services at Caron Treatment Centers. Since 2005, Kate has been a clinician working specifically in adult behavioral health treatment with a focus on relapse prevention, family systems, and behavioral addictions. She has been working with and developing programs for executives, healthcare professionals, and opioid addiction since 2013. Her tenure at Caron has allowed her to receive training in addiction interactive disorder and professional development. She is also a certified clinical supervisor, a certified advanced alcohol and drug counselor, and holds CSAT and CMAT certifications. Welcome, Christine and Kate.
Thanks, Adam, and thank you to all for joining today. I'm Christine Storm, and I'm joining you from my home in Wilmington, Delaware, and I hope everyone's doing well. We have a lot that we want to talk about today with this really important topic, and Kate and I thought it would be helpful if we launched a poll to get things started to kind of understand who our audience is today. Like, obviously this presentation is being geared towards helping parents, but we also know that a lot of folks that join these View from the Mountains are also joining from a professional capacity. So we're just going to take a few minutes to see what happens with this poll. Okay, it looks like we're over half of people having voted now. Give it another couple seconds. We have a landslide with mental health coming through. All right, so let's share these results. So hopefully everybody can see this now. We've got 9% of you guys that have joined today are in the medical field. So hopefully you're gonna learn some information today that'll help you with that. And then we have a large portion, over half, that are coming from some sort of mental health capacity. And then some that are in school and youth serving organizations, which is really, that's my jam. That's my area that I tend to work in. And then we have a mixture of others. So that could be some of our parents that are joining. So that's great. Thanks so much. That's really going to be helpful for us as we're doing this. Okay.
So my name's Kate Appelman. I'm not in Wilmington, Delaware, which is really nice down there, Christine. I'm actually up perched on the side of the mountain in Wernersville, Pennsylvania, and I'm really grateful to be here with you. When I look at the poll, my jam is mental health. I've been a clinician here for about 15 years, and I'm really excited about this topic. So let's just get into learning objectives. So we're going to talk a little bit about teens, COVID, drinking, all of those pieces, and when teens are transitioning back into life after COVID, what exactly does that mean and look like? We're going to talk about some common misconceptions when it comes to teens and drinking, and using some research and data Christine is going to talk about regarding some of those misconceptions, but also really talk about, you know, I'm a big fan of, we could talk about the problem, the misconceptions, and kind of the current state of our reality to a certain degree, but then also really looking at solutions, whether it's related to role modeling responsible alcohol consumption, if it's around different dynamics when it comes to communicating with teens around drinking. We're going to cover a little bit of all of that today.
Great. So why is this webinar so timely? Kate and I actually did a version of this presentation a month ago. And it was for a different audience, just as we were taking a look at early June and what's going to happen. So we know that there's an increased risk for adolescent alcohol and drug abuse during times of transition. That's times of risk factors for kids. And when you think about 2020 and what that has looked like, it is just an incredible amount of transition and so much uncertainty. So we're taking a look at all of these things intersecting. Summer is already a time of some of the highest substance use risk with teens. So we had that already as a concern. Drunk driving, already a concern when it comes into summer. But now we're adding the fact that we've had these extremely cooped up teens for a couple of months now that are possibly looking to blow off some steam, and what's that going to look like. So one of the reasons we're doing this webinar, and I'm sure a lot of you on this line today are aware that there were some really concerning numbers coming out about increased alcohol buying and consumption during COVID-19. So when this whole pandemic and the shutdown first started in early March, there was the stat that there was a 55% increase in alcohol sales that week in March versus the prior year. So what does that tell us? That a lot of people completely panicked that they weren't going to be able to get alcohol for months, or that that's how a lot of people were planning on coping with the fact that they were going to be stuck inside for a long time. We've also have heard a lot of stories of parents relaxing rules at home. So parents who maybe said, you know, I would never allow my teen to drink underage in my home, now out of feeling bad for their teenager. Or maybe it was a college age kid and you know that your college age kid was drinking on campus, but now they're home. So we were hearing stories of parents drinking with their kids, relaxing these rules that they have at home. And now they're possibly stuck with the, you know, I let the genie out of the bottle, can I get it back in? Like, what do I do now? Yeah, again, when quarantine ends, cooped up teens might be looking for ways to blow off steam, possibly in unhealthy ways. I was sharing with Kate and Adam the other day that when we did this presentation a month ago, that was a fear. And then I have an 18-year-old son. I watched what happened with his graduating class, and they did. They went wild. It was down at the shore for senior week. There's a big COVID outbreak amongst his senior class right now. So some of those things we were afraid of were absolutely the reality there. And then again, like we said, summertime already, you have increased rates of drunk and drug driving, especially around like July 4th, which we're past now. But, you know, we always have to be concerned about that risk. So let's do some stats first. I always think it's good to get started with understanding the scope of what's going on today. So we're going to be taking a look at some trending. And one of the really wonderful things about the trending with underage drinking is that it has been down over the past decade. And I think we just, as a society, have a tendency to think that every generation things just get worse and worse and worse. And maybe that's partially because the news and the media like to dramatize everything that's going on, and we don't focus enough on some of the really good progress that we're making. So underage drinking is responsible for about 4,300 deaths of underage youth each year. When I first started at Caron 16 years ago, that number was 5,000. So while we've seen less drinking underage, we are seeing less deaths as a result. But we still have some stuff that needs to be worked on. Young people, 12 to 20, consume about 11% of all alcohol that's drank in this country. So while they tend to drink less often than adults, young people, though, tend to abuse alcohol. So when we think about, teenagers that get together to drink, they're not like sitting around on a Friday night talking about their week and sipping wine. Like, that's not what's going on. The purpose of alcohol for many young people is drink to get drunk. It's not to, enhance the flavor of food or all of those kinds of things. It's get it down fast in order to get drunk. So 90% of alcohol, when young people consume it, it is in the form of binge drinking. And with binge drinking, that's 5 or more drinks in a row for a guy and 4 or more drinks in a row for a girl. And we'll define what drinks are. I'm sure a lot of you know that, but just to make sure we're all on the same page in a little bit. So we know that underage drinkers consume more drinks per drinking occasion than adult drinkers. And that's what's really scary, binge drinking and the possibility of what that leads to. So let's just take a look at overall at some underage drinking dangers. I don't think that these are hugely shocking. It's a really good comprehensive list from the Surgeon General of all the things that keep us up at night as parents of teens and college students and make us worry, because we know all of these things that can happen. I don't know one student who has ever performed better in school as a result of drinking, okay? So that is the first thing that we are concerned about, is what it could do to somebody's academics, their memory, their ability to think through and plan and process the things that they're learning in school. Social problems, giving up activities that were once really important and really productive in an effort to allow time for drinking. So that becomes kind of like the way to have fun and blow off steam. Legal problems that can follow you, physical problems like hangovers and illnesses. And the interesting thing is, I think a lot of times we think that, well, drug and alcohol education, we have to tell kids these things because they simply don't know them. When I go into schools, and that's one of the main things that I do, is we do pros and cons lists. We talk about reasons why. We talk about reasons why not to. And when I ask classrooms of high school students to put together a list of all of the potential consequences that can happen from underage drinking, they list all of these things. They might not know about this normal growth and sexual development stuff, but they understand the risks of all these other things. The danger with young people is that even though they know the risks a lot of the time, their way their brain is wired is that they are focused more on the reward than fearing the risk that could come, okay? So that's part of it. This unwanted, unplanned, unprotected sexual activity. We're not talking about sexual assault here. We're talking about sexual activity that is later regretted. So that we know that alcohol and sex is very much linked together with teens. And a huge part of that is that when you're starting to delve into intimacy with another human being, that is an extremely nerve-wracking, potentially embarrassing, scary proposition. And for a lot of young people, they're under the assumption that anxiety and nerves are not okay, and they need to be numbed, that it's not normal, it's not okay to be nervous about all of that, and that maybe alcohol will give them some of that liquid courage. Another wonderful thing about this generation, though, is that they are more likely to remain virgins longer than in any prior generation. So normalizing for kids that the drunken hookup that is perpetuated in every movie and TV show that they watch, that doesn't have to be the norm, that actually most kids their age are not having sex, and that's really good until they're ready, right? And the normal growth in sexual development. So we know that studies have found that alcohol can lower the levels of growth in sex hormones in adolescent boys and girls during puberty that are really critical for sexual maturation and muscle and bone density and things like that. okay? And then here's just some other ones. The physical and sexual assault. Huge concern. When I'm talking to parents, when I'm talking to teens, boys are afraid of getting accused. Girls are afraid of this happening to them. It's very much been a national discussion. There have been documentaries that kids will bring up. Audrey and Daisy is a good one that you might find on Netflix if you're looking for something to watch with your teen and have a discussion around. So that's a huge concern. We know that when young people pass away, the 3 leading causes of death are accidents, murder, and suicide. It's not cancer and heart disease. It's all things that are based on behavior. And alcohol is involved at least 50% of the time when a young person passes away. Memory issues, you're more likely to try another drug for the first time while under the influence of alcohol. And then we know if someone starts regularly drinking before age 15, they quadruple their chances of developing an alcohol use disorder. And that's all about the malleability of the teenage brain. So one thing to keep in mind is that while in the past decade, lifetime use of underage drinking has gone down, we're starting to see that trend pop up a little bit. So if you look at this from Monitoring the Future, these 2019 numbers, 2018, it was 56% of our 12th graders had ever drank before. Now that's up to 59%. So we just need to be aware that this has to be a continued conversation. It's certainly not a once and done. And we need to very much focus on the dangers of binge drinking. So here's just some other stats for you. And again, this is from Monitoring the Future, which is a national survey that's been done every year since the mid-70s. And it's really the gold standard of how we track substance use with young people. It's done nationally and it's considered very, very reputable. So this is what came back in 2019 across the country of those who drank in the past month, been drunk, binge drinking, and daily drinking. And I can guarantee you these numbers are lower than anyone that's listening when you were in high school.
And as we continue to look at the statistics and where we are in our country with our teens, I think one of the other factors that is really important to consider is the fact that there are so many conflicting messages that teens are hearing about alcohol. As Christine goes through and really talks about some of the dangers, some of the realities of how alcohol impacts the developing brain, we can look at that from a standpoint of taking facts and making decisions based on facts. When we look at what it's like to live in the life of a teen, we also have to take into consideration when we look at the ways that TV and movies and social media is really influencing our teens, the message that we may be giving as parents or healthcare providers may be very different than the message that they're getting out there. I have, my husband and I have 3 kids, age 1, 10, and 17. It goes okay some days and not so well other days. And my 17-year-old son had come down to us one day and said, "You have to watch The Outer Banks. It's an amazing show on Netflix." And my husband and I made it through one episode, and the amount of underage drinking, drug use, guns, and when you look at the image of drinking, they're all in the Outer Banks. They're on a boat, they're suntanned, they're drinking and having a great time. So we have to take into consideration the fact that there are many conflicting messages around alcohol. And when Christine talks about the importance of continued conversation, it's really important for us to make sure that we are continuing that conversation, because the reality is the influence that TV, movies, social media, and music has on them, that's a continuous piece of information that continues to go in. So it's important as parents and as healthcare providers that we're also looking at making sure that we're consistent with our messaging too. And one of the ways to start doing that is to really look at common misconceptions about alcohol. Let's talk about the facts and the myths and really look at how do we lean into research and truth to really understand what those misconceptions are.
Thanks, Kate. Yeah, I think that's a great point. If they're hearing conflicting messages from their friends and from media, us as adults need to be giving very consistent, clear messaging, and we don't often do that. A lot of times, and Kate and I heard this the last time we did this presentation, a lot of even just couples, when two parents are not on the same page. You know, dad is, you know, grew up with wine at the dinner table, the occasional beer with his father, and wants to raise their children that way. And mom maybe has a history of alcoholism in the family, and they're not even on the same page. So it is extremely challenging. So let's go through with just a couple of these misconceptions, things that we hear often. And it's not my job or my goal really to tell anyone how to parent their kids. It's really just to take a look at what are some of the things that research shows might reduce the likelihood that your child will develop issues with alcohol. Okay, so here is one that's often very well intentioned, but something that you might want to think about. I need to allow my teen to drink at home to prepare them for college. Hear it all the time. Part of this is this fear that if I forbid it, they're going to go wild in college. Or if I don't help them develop a tolerance now, then they're not going to be able to handle it in college. So there's a lot that goes into that. So here's some of the things that I talk to parents about. So when we're talking about introducing alcohol to a child at home, that's usually in a pretty controlled setting. You know, you're sitting around at the table with your family. Maybe it's wine, maybe it's beer. You know, you're with your family. Kids don't want to get drunk with mom and dad. It is easy to sip wine at the dinner table with mom and dad. That does not, what happened here? Okay, that does not set them up for being able to take that same situation at home and then translate that to the social scene. When we're talking about the social scene, there is so much else going into that. There is kids being self-conscious about fitting in with friends. There's pressure to binge drink. There's maybe that boy or that girl that you have a crush on and you're nervous around them, so you may want to drink a little bit more to ease that. There's drinking games, you know? So just because we introduce alcohol to them at home, possibly at the dinner table, or allow them to have some sips at a wedding, that doesn't necessarily translate to them being able to understand how to utilize alcohol in a social situation where there's all these other factors at play. We are going to launch another poll here, and it's really, it's about the law and people's idea of what they think the drinking age should be. Because one of the things that we hear often is, well, you know, if somebody's an adult at 18, we should not be able to tell them what to put into their body. So I'm just curious to see what the folks on the call today think about this one. 18, 21, or 25 are your only options. Maybe you think it should be something else, if that's what we're going with. Okay, about half of people have voted so far. All right. Okay, so we closed that out and showed the results. So we've got 13% of people think that we should drop it back down to 18, which is where it was up until the 80s, right? And the majority of you guys, you say, you know, let's stick with 21, and there's a portion that says 25. And that's really because I imagine that's where the science backs up when brain development stops. Okay. All right.
So I really appreciate that feedback because as we start to really look at 18 or 21, you know, Christine identifies that back in the 80s, the legal age for drinking moved from 18 to 21. And I can tell you with my 17-year-old, we have this conversation that I don't understand why I can't drink, but I can serve in the armed forces. I can vote for my president, but I can't have a legal drink. And, you know, as we were putting together this presentation, one of the things we had talked about was we all know that the brain, you know, gets to the point of full development around the age of 25. And we look at the risk factors of putting mood and mind altering chemicals into a developing brain. So why is the legal age 21? You know, I can't say what's right or wrong. And statistically, what I can say is that when states increased the legal drinking age to 21, they actually saw a 16% decline in motor vehicle accidents for people amongst that age. Also, after all states adopted the minimum drinking age, the legal drinking age to be 21, drinking during the previous month among people 18 to 20 actually declined by almost 60%. There's also evidence that the age of 21, drinking age actually protects drinkers from alcohol and other drug dependence. And some other pieces. So one of the things that has happened is if you look statistically at what happened back in the mid 80s, as we increased the legal drinking age to 21, the amount of drinking between age 18 to 21 had significantly decreased. So as you look at some of those pieces, 18 versus 21, we're in a position where, if the message is hold off as long as you possibly can, to put mood and mind altering substances in your system, because, sometimes you hit a point of no return, and put alcohol into situations that become triggers for you, that you use it to grieve, you use it because it's Tuesday, it's raining, you're celebrating, you're using it for all different reasons versus learning how to grow up, and not have mood and mind altering substances, that are going to kind of reframe your reality on a consistent basis.
Another is they're going to drink anyways. I'd rather them do it under my roof. So it's this idea that, we can protect and we can control things more as long as it's happening under our roof. So here's a few things that I just like to put out there. And the first is, why are we making the assumption that the child's going to drink? So it's kind of like just giving up before we've even gotten to that point. And it's setting an expectation. If you say that to a child, that I know you're going to drink anyway. You're a teenager. It's what teenagers do. I don't want you to be stupid, and I'd rather you do it under my roof, where I can keep an eye on things. So we're going to talk more about that on the next slide, that whole idea of hosting parties at your own home. But I do want to say that our kids follow our lead. Obviously, when we look at statistics, more than half of kids have had a drink in high school. Like more than half have graduated having had a drink. But there's still a really large portion that hasn't. So if we set this expectation that I don't want you to, it's unhealthy for you, I love you, I'm afraid of what that could happen. So setting that expectation that I don't want you to, and I'm assuming that you're not going to. There's just also some things that statistics back up. So supplying alcohol to minors increases the risk of continued drinking in the teen years. So study after study has shown that. And then also I know that teens, when they perceive their parents to be more permissive about alcohol, they're more likely to abuse alcohol and other drugs. I very much study the Pennsylvania Youth Survey results that come out every year. And for those who aren't familiar, Pennsylvania Youth Survey is done every other year with Pennsylvania area schools with 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders. And there is an absolute correlation between teens who perceive their parents as being permissive and then them using it at a higher level. Kids who say my parents are very against this, they have rules against it, use it at a lower level. Okay, so just take that into consideration.
And that really goes into the misconception that as long as no one drives home, it's actually safer for them to partake in my home. And at least if they're under my own roof, I have some kind of control over that. And as Christine talks about, the reality that the more permissive we are, the more drinking happens versus guidelines and boundaries. And I can tell you that, my own experience, my 17-year-old does not love boundaries all the time. And on the flip side of that, he's able to acknowledge that boundaries put him in a position where he actually does feel safer, again, depending on the day. What we have to really take a look at is many times if we're in a position where we're allowing our teens to drink in our homes, there is this false sense of safety. There's a false sense of being able to control it that's not always necessarily the truth. We also need to acknowledge that as we look at social hosting laws and ordinances, we're not in a position to serve other children alcohol. It's not our right as parents to do that. And the amount of times that we hear stories about a parent choosing to serve alcohol to minors in a home with or without the permission of another adult or parent, we hear those stories so frequently in our circles. And one of the things that we really have to take a look at is the fact that if we're serving drinks to teens on our property, we can actually be subject to criminal and civil charges. And what exactly does that mean? So many times when I think about this, we really look at the fact that we're in a position where our values and our behaviors as parents and as healthcare workers, they have to match, right? And many times when we start to look at underage drinking, if we're allowing children to illegally drink in our homes or allow other people's children to illegally drink in our homes, how are we okay with that? And in the midst of trying to hold boundaries in place around drinking and driving that's illegal, around other drug use that's illegal. So kind of taking that into consideration as we look at our decision making. And when we think about proudly wearing our uncool parent badge, how do we weave that into our conversations that I know that this is not the popular opinion or decision that you want me to make as a parent. It's easier for me to just say yes, and it's important for me to make the hard decision because I love you.
Here's another, and I hear this a lot, not just from kids, but from parents at a lot of the parent presentations that I give. So there's this long-standing myth and belief that kids in Europe have less drinking problems. They drink less often because they're introduced to alcohol at a younger age, and it's part of the culture. So I know that for those of you who are maybe watching this on an itty bitty phone, you can't see this chart very well. Let me tell you exactly where it's from so that you can look it up yourself, but it's the 2015 European School Survey Project on Alcohol and Other Drugs. That is very comparable to our Monitoring the Future survey. So this is what came back. It's a list that compares the past heavy drinking, binge drinking rates in the last 30 days amongst European countries. And then if you see way at the bottom where they have that arrow, that's where the US comes into play. So we know that in European countries, the age is often 16 or it's 18 for when somebody can legally drink. The highest drinking rates are in Denmark. And Denmark actually doesn't have a minimum drinking age. They have one for when you can purchase alcohol, but it's not illegal for somebody to drink at any age. And I actually did a behavioral health assessment this year on a boarding school student from Denmark, and his description of drinking back home backs this up. It was every weekend, large amounts, and this is a kid with social anxiety who's really struggling with being in a social situation now without being intoxicated, because he's kind of gotten used to being able to do that.
And in current times, the last piece that we're going to talk about in the misconception section is the misconception that drunk driving is a thing of the past now because of rideshare. And really looking at what are the rates of underage drinking and driving, but also looking at how often are teens getting in the car with other people who are under the influence, and how does rideshare kind of support that? So there was a study that was done, 2017 youth risk on youth risk behavior, and two of the things that it actually identified was that 6% of the participants in that survey identified that they drove after drinking alcohol. 17% identified that they rode with a driver who had been drinking alcohol. So as we look at the idea of Uber and Lyft and different ride shares, one of the things that we have to take into consideration is if kids are in a position where they're using things like Uber and Lyft, while it may appear to make them more safe in that moment, one of the things that we hear frequently is the fact that it almost helps give people permission to drink more and in larger amounts than they had intended to, and really help support binge drinking because they have a ride home that they can depend on. Again, it may keep them safe in that moment, but on the flip side of it, if it's continuing to encourage more binge drinking, how safe is it really? We're also in a position that when we start looking at ride shares, we have people who are underage now getting in the car with adults that they don't necessarily know. And what are all the risk factors in that as well? So as we continue to move and we start looking into the whole concept of moving into the solution, let's talk a little bit about considerations and responsible modeling and what that means for us as parents, but also some things to think about if we are healthcare providers and working with family systems. So Christine had touched on this a little bit earlier, really looking at the fact that there is increased drinking as summer approaches. And when you add COVID on top of that, let's look at the reality of our situation and the reality of the situation with teens. So Christine had talked about this desire to kind of let off steam, and many of our teens are in that position. But there's also a dynamic as it relates to parenting that many parents go through, and healthcare providers are now hearing in their own therapy sessions. And we start to think about the importance of really raising awareness of overcompensation. I think about my kids being at home day in and day out and homeschooling, and you have teenagers that their job is to socialize. That is their job. It's to socialize and get to know who the heck they are, and their friend group is the most important influence on them. And now they're in a position where they don't necessarily have that at their fingertips. So being aware as a parent or as a healthcare provider, where have we overcompensated based on the fact that we're in a pandemic that we've never been through this before? This is new for us. And we're not really sure necessarily, how do we flex parenting? How do we flex services? What does that look like? So it's new for us, and it's new for them. We can acknowledge and support parents in really understanding that their feelings don't have to necessarily drive their decisions. The truth is that as parents, I know for me, and from what I've heard about parents in the colleagues that I have, but also the patients I have in treatment that are also parents, the guilt and remorse and sadness and loss and fear, and all of those feelings are coming up for so many people, including our teens. So it's okay for us to acknowledge that we have all those feelings too as parents and healthcare workers, and it doesn't mean that they necessarily have to drive our decisions. Looking at supporting the pause and then the conversation, and Christine will talk about that piece a little bit more. The last piece I want to talk about on the slide is, as healthcare providers, as medical professionals, and as professionals who work in school systems, I think one thing that's going to be really important to continue is to really understand what are our own hooks, but also helping families and parents understand their emotional hooks. COVID has been very difficult. We've had parents at home trying to work full-time, parent full-time, navigate the changes full-time, and none of us are doing it perfectly. And there can be guilt and sadness and loss, and all of those things have been a reality for all of us. That's okay. How do we understand our own hooks so that we can make sure that we can kind of hit a reset button to a certain extent and really be conscientious and purposeful about the decisions that we're making as it relates to our team?
Thanks, Kate. So let's talk about some of the ways that us as adults can be our kids' best teachers, because that's who we are. From the time they come into this world, they are watching us for how to behave, how to navigate things. And our alcohol use and our patterns with that teach our kids a lot of things. So let's talk about how we can follow some guidelines here. And the first is to really understand how much you're drinking, and to model for kids that we want to stay away from binge drinking. I don't remember, maybe it's just me and my poor memory, but I don't have a really strong memory of being in high school and really being taught about the drug alcohol and how it interacts, what is considered a drink, what necessarily is binge drinking. And I think we do a much better job of that now. But our kids need to understand it's a really tricky drug, and actually one of the easiest ones to overdose on. So they need that level of education. And that doesn't mean that we have to let them practice under our roof, but we can model that, and we can continue to talk to them about this. So helping them to understand what is considered a drink, 12 ounces of 5% beer. If you're having like a 9.5% craft beer, that's basically 2 drinks in 1 bottle. Right? For all of these, the liver can process 1 drink an hour. If you put 3 drinks in an hour into your system, it chills out in your bloodstream and waits for its turn for the liver to process it. The higher the amount of alcohol in the bloodstream, the more areas of your brain that are impacted, and the more potential chances for dangerous things to happen. And when we're talking about modeling, The CDC recommends, or the American Medical Association recommends, no more than 1 drink a day for a woman and 2 drinks a day for a man. And they're starting to reconsider that 2 drinks a day for a man as well, as that being possibly a little bit high. And, you know, we need to educate our daughters that their bodies process alcohol differently than their male counterparts. So if they're trying to keep up with the boys at a party, they will have more significant risks and side effects than a guy would, because we have more fat and less water in our body to dilute alcohol. We have less gastric enzymes in our stomach to break down alcohol. Women and men who drink the same amount over the same consistent period of time, women are going to be more likely to develop illness and things like that as a result. So these are things that we need to educate our kids about. And they need to know that just because it's a delicious White Claw and it doesn't taste like there's any alcohol in it, there's a lot of alcohol in it, okay? So just because it goes down easy, you know, no more than a drink an hour. And we want to model what we would consider lower risk drinking. So that's, you know, drinking with food, never having more than a drink an hour, knowing what you're drinking. So the whole idea of like the party and the jungle juice and the mixed drink that you didn't make, you don't know how much liquor is in that. Alternating alcoholic drinks with water. And having a plan for how much you're going to drink. If you're going to be going to that summer barbecue, saying it to yourself in your head, all right, I'm going to try to keep it at 2 drinks tonight, right? Okay. And knowing, of course, how you're going to be getting home. And then if we don't want our kids drinking and driving, we can't be doing that as well. I remember my son, when he was 15, he had a friend, and his friend's parents drink heavily. And they were allowing him as a 15-year-old to drive the family home, because parents, they would go out, the parents would get too drunk, letting the kid drive home at 15. Like, what messaging is that sending? That's a big problem. So having a plan, you know, if you and your spouse are going to be going to a party or a barbecue or out to dinner, maybe one person has a drink or 2 that night and the other is the driver. So we're showing our children that there should be that designated driver. If for some reason you do overdo it, don't drive. Call a friend, a taxi, a rideshare service. Always wear your seatbelt. Report if you're on the road and you see somebody who appears to be impaired, report that. You know, that's good for your kids to see.
I think another element to really be aware of is, what message do we give about alcohol and stress management? So we have a couple pieces in here that if anybody, for all of the people who are connected to social media, you've seen many of these. Some are COVID related, some are not necessarily related to COVID. But 2 things. One, I acknowledge the fact that social media is very much a reflection of our defense system. So if we use humor, if we use deflection as ways to kind of defend something, many times the things that we see on social media and many of the memes that are on this slide are very much a reflection of our defense system. And also, you know, a reminder that our kids, they really listen with their eyes and their ears. So it's about what it is that they're seeing in our behavior, but also how is it that we talk about a relationship with alcohol? What does that look like?
You know, we're in summer party season, right? And then that's a wonderful thing. You know, we all look forward to summer every year, especially if we live in the Northeast and it's cold, and then suddenly we have some warm weather. So I think, you know, always just letting our kids see that when we have some sort of family party, that alcohol can be a part of that without being the central focus of that. So letting kids know that, you know, what is the point of getting together with a family reunion or a graduation party or a birthday party? It's for celebration, right? It's for catching up with loved ones, and asking yourself, what role does alcohol play in that with our family and with our family gatherings? So I think it can be an adjunct to the event without being the center focus of it. And I know for myself, we have a lot of alcoholism and addiction in our family. So when we have any sort of family events, we're very mindful of making sure that alcohol is not the central focus, and that there are a lot of alcohol-free alternatives for folks in recovery that don't want to drink and can't drink. We're going to make sure that anybody who appears to be overdoing it, we're making sure that they have a ride home and that they're safe and that we cut them off if we can. And plan for ways at any parties that you have to make sure that teens can't sneak off with some alcohol, that we keep them entertained and occupied, and we're really monitoring where the alcohol is and making it really difficult for them to get themselves in trouble. And then, of course, show kids that you can have fun without alcohol, all right? I think it's really important that you have, even if you are a family that has alcohol with dinner, show every once in a while that you don't have to do that, right? That you can enjoy dinner just as much when it's just conversation with the family. That you can do wholesome things like putting a puzzle together or going for a picnic. And that there's lots of different ways that you can have fun and that you can get together with friends without having to have alcohol be the be all end all of that gathering. So again, showing them how to have fun. All right, so let's kind of dive into not just modeling, but the conversations and how we have that with our teens. There's a couple of different slides that we're going to go through with this. And the first thing that we want to do is really educate. A lot of parents are kind of assuming that schools are taking care of all the education for them. And I think it's really important that we don't let that happen. Schools have an obligation under Act 211. Every kid, every year has to have some level of education about substance use, but sometimes that's just a one-time assembly and it's done. This is not a once and done conversation, and it's not just one that we need to allow the schools to do. It should be an ongoing thing with our families that we talk about. And one is really talking about the implications of underage drinking. So I always tell kids this story about this girl that I did an interview on. She wanted a position within our department a few years ago. And this was not a girl who had an alcohol use disorder, but when she was 19, she got a DUI. And she let me know in the interview that FYI, when you do the background check on me, it's going to come up that I got a DUI when I was 19. So it just made me think that this girl has to disclose this at all times. And if she wanted to be able to work in certain professions, that would exclude her from being able to do that because she has that misdemeanor on her record. Obviously, working in the substance abuse field and a treatment center, we are very, commonly have staff members who have some stuff in their background. So we're a little bit more accepting of that, but not all employers are. So the legal implications, underage drinking and decision-making. So this little cartoon here shows a bunch of organs drinking at a party. And basically it's saying that alcohol affects every inch of your body, but the very first thing to go is that executive functioning, your ability to judge a situation. It can reduce inhibition, which basically means it makes things that are very risky seem not risky. So when I'm in a classroom full of kids and I talk about drunk driving, they all say, I would never drink and drive. But after a drink or two, suddenly it doesn't seem as dangerous, right? And describe again how not every drink is the same. So that's again, that education about what is a drink. How is liquor sometimes getting somebody in more trouble, things like that. Then, of course, we want to talk about empowering them. And one of the ways we can do that is by perpetuating accurate social norms. So young people are under the impression that all of their peers are drinking and using drugs. So if we do surveys with kids and I go into a classroom and I say to a group of 10th graders, what percentage of 10th graders in this school drink at least once a month? They say 99%, right? That's a pretty typical answer I'll get. There is no surveys that back that up. That's a perception. And when that's your perception, you put pressure on yourself to fit in. So we want to normalize non-drinking, that many kids don't drink. They just don't brag about it. Like who brags about, I went to the movies with my friends and I got home by curfew and I read for a little bit before I went to bed. Like no one's putting that on social media, right? So, but they will brag about the other stuff. So we have to normalize the non-drinking and really help our kids know that there is nothing wrong with them. If they're awkward, if they're say something embarrassing every once in a while, if they're not 100% confident at all times, that is okay. For those of you who've seen Chris Herron, who's a former NBA player turned motivational speaker, if you've ever seen him speak, that's a huge part of his message, and the kids really lean into that. It's really amazing to see him saying, you know, for some reason, when you're in elementary and middle school, you can have a blast together with your friends. Just being yourself with your friends is enough. And why does that have to change in high school? Why are you suddenly not cool enough to hang out with just you and your personality unless you're drinking? Like, we really have to question that. We have to prepare our kids with the language to turn down a drink offer. For some kids, they're just not confident enough yet to come out and say, I don't drink. We want to help them get to that point so that they, you know, their friends know this about them, but maybe we have to help them with excuses until they're comfortable with that. And those excuses could be, my mom is nuts and she will ground me forever if she finds out that I was drinking. Like, allow yourself to be that bad guy. Help them with these tools for minimizing peer pressure, understanding that sometimes when somebody else is peer pressuring them, that is more about that person than about who they are. It's more like, if everybody else does this wrong thing with me, I feel less guilty. And knowledge is power. If you have a family history of addiction, you need to share that with your kids, right? That is part of their medical record. That just like you would share a family history of breast cancer because your daughter might be at higher risk, you need to share a family history of alcoholism because that can influence your child's choices. And that could be their reason that they tell people they don't drink. Got a lot of alcoholics in my family. I am not drinking until I'm much older, if at all. And then those teachable stories. And then, of course, family values. We want to set clear and consistent boundaries, but also don't be saying to your kids, I don't want you to drink because I'm the parent, I say so, and that's it, right? We need to really talk to them and have a conversation about the whys behind it. Why I don't want you to. Why I worry about you with drinking. Why I worry about, you know, sexual assault and car accidents and other kinds of accidents and reputation and the way that you are learning how to handle stress and other things as a teenager and brain development and all of those things. Monitor appropriately. If you're a family that has alcohol in the house, make sure it's locked up. Teens are very, very good at watering down the liquor, right? And thinking you don't know any wiser. And have a kind of balanced relationship with that teen where you have expectations, you have rules that you want them to follow, but that you're also approachable if they need help. And the last thing I want to talk about is maybe considering designing an agreement together. And this comes from the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids, and it's excellent. So this is just a sample agreement. And what I love about this is that there are youth promises, but then there's also stuff that parents promise too. It's not a completely one-sided, you're gonna all do this, but it's taking some ownership as an adult too. Okay, so some of the things on this are, you know, you sit down with your kid and you say, these are my expectations. I don't want you to drink, use nicotine, or take other drugs, get in a car with someone who's been drinking. And then here's what I'm gonna do as well. I will be a positive role model. I will create a safe space for us to talk about this. I will not overreact or judge things. I will love you for who you are. So it's just a really great conversation starter and way for a family to get on the same page together about this. And of course I went too long. Go ahead.
No, you're good.
It's all you, Kate.
I'm gonna wrap us up in the next couple of minutes. I got it. So when we think about different tips for intervening, one of the things to really think about are, what are the signs of problematic drinking behavior? And what many of us realize, either as parents or a healthcare provider, is that the intersection between substance use concerns, mental health concerns, and being a teenager, they can very much look alike at times. So let's talk a little bit about some of the symptoms. So signs of problematic drinking, what exactly does that look like? We talk about symptoms like the preoccupation, I can't stop thinking about it, the compulsion, I can't help but do it. When values and behaviors don't match, I value honesty and I lie, I value commitment and I don't show up. That's a really nice thing that we can either as parents or healthcare workers really hold a mirror up to. We talk about the whole concept of using alone. Using alone is not normal. And when kids try to explain to us that it is, I can tell you it's not normal to use alone. When we're using to self-medicate, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, a lack of control, blackouts, tolerance, the need for an increased amount to achieve a desired effect. Here are some things that we really want to take a look at as we're starting to acknowledge whether or not there is a substance use concern. And as we start to consider co-occurring conditions, almost half of the people with substance use disorders also have a mental health disorder. Unless you live in my world in inpatient treatment, it's more like 85% that have a co-occurring disorder. So it's very, very common. And when we ask ourselves, what about it is so common? Here are some of the things that are going to be really important to take a look at. So when we look at genetic vulnerabilities, with epigenetic factors and gene expression, specific genes and chemical use are obviously associated with the onset of a disorder. So we have to take that into consideration. When we look at neurocognitive factors and when we look at brain development, any brain development issues around self-regulation will very easily lend themselves to substance use issues. So when we look at that piece, generalized self-regulatory deficits that are seen actually in the first decade of life can predict mood disorders and substance use issues. So we also have to acknowledge that. Developmental, we obviously know the brain is obviously going through development. In environmental factors, where are our teens most vulnerable to adverse experiences in the way that they've grown up? And then obviously looking at the whole concept of self-medication and that hypothesis. There's different ways that we can look at it. And in my experience, all can be true at the same time. It doesn't have to be just one factor. As we move along, the truth is self-medicating alone doesn't in and of itself explain the high rates of co-occurring issues. There are times when it's very clear that our teens are self-medicating another issue. I really love this survey. When we look at desired effects of drinking, it's important to really understand what's motivating someone with a co-occurring disorder to use a particular substance. What are they looking for? What are they looking to achieve? What are they looking to feel? I want to understand that because the answers to this are actually going to give me more insight into their risk factors. So this is a really good tool I wanted to share with you all. If you want to keep going, Caitlin, and flip one more. As alcohol, when we look at, go ahead one more, Caitlin. The alcohol effects that mimic mental health disorders go back to one of the things that we want to take a look at is the fact that the symptoms of intoxication, acute withdrawal, and protracted withdrawal for alcohol can look like mental disorders. And I have a 17-year-old boy. It can also look like being a 17-year-old boy. When you think about mood lability, you think about mood swings, and there's times when he, struggles with sleep and anxiety and agitation that can come along with all of the hormonal changes that happen with teenagers. So really looking at ways that we can identify the overlap. And as we look at, I put in here the quadrant model, which I really appreciate. I do have a typo on the slide. In between the two lows should be number 1. As we look at the quadrant model and use that as a model to really look at what treatment services are we providing as a healthcare worker, if we're in the medical field or in a school setting, what exactly are we looking at? How do we start to really look at differential diagnosis and ensuring that whether the substance use severity is low or high or the psychiatric severity is low or high, are we meeting them where they're at based on their current symptoms? And that's where really the importance of getting professional help, because the truth is sometimes it's hard to distinguish. So part of why we wanted to put this presentation together with a plethora of resources and probably way too much information is that you can go back and really utilize the resources so that you can make really informed decisions either as a parent or a healthcare worker.
And then we just wanted to leave you with this intervention ebook, again, from the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. So if you're a parent who is now concerned about your child's alcohol use, maybe they went off to college and they've come back home and you're seeing things that are really concerning to you, this book kind of breaks down all sorts of different areas about how to intervene. And obviously it first starts with a conversation. But then it breaks down the idea of going for a professional assessment to help you figure out when you have a concern exactly where to go next, because it's very complicated to navigate the behavioral health system without professional guidance. And some other websites that I think are really fantastic. We've got NIDA, we've got MAD. They have great tools and guides for parents of middle and high school students of how to prevent underage drinking. Adam, what I would suggest is we go through some of the wrapping up of this, and then anyone that wants to stick around, we can do Q&A. Would that work?
That sounds wonderful. So I want to again thank Christine and Kate for a fantastic presentation. We will be emailing everyone a copy of the slides as well as a link to a recording of this webinar. And as a reminder, we are offering continuing education credit for social workers for this presentation. A survey will be posted for you to take immediately following this presentation in order to obtain credits. Again, you must have been on for the duration of the presentation to get the credit. You will receive a certificate of completion in the next couple of weeks. In addition to the great resources that Christine and Kate provided today, we also invite you to take advantage of some great learning opportunities through our digital learning platform. These complimentary courses have been designed for parents and caregivers, school and other serving professionals and healthcare professionals to obtain knowledge and skills that will increase their confidence and competence in addressing a variety of topics surrounding substance use, from prevention to recovery. They're based online, allowing the programs to be completed at your own time and pace. A certificate of completion will be available at the end of the program, but they are not eligible for continuing education credits at this time. To access our digital learning platform, visit caron.org and under our programs, click the link for Education Alliance to access the course. Also, please join us next Tuesday, July 21st, as we welcome Christine and Kate back to speak on the topic Teens and Cannabis Conversation, Separating Fact from Fiction. Also, on July 28th, we hope you will join us for our On the Front Lines of COVID-19, Trauma, PTSD, and Mental Health Implications and Solutions for the Essential Worker. Each of these presentations will be eligible for one social work credit. Watch your email for details on how to register for these presentations. Finally, please reach out to your local regional resource director at any time for additional information or resources in your area, questions regarding admission to any of Caron's programs, or any other general information that you need regarding Caron. Our residential campuses in both Pennsylvania and Florida are open and ready to provide world-class care for those suffering with substance use disorder and mental health issues. We have had zero community spread of COVID-19 at any of our sites. Additionally, our regional recovery centers have gone remote but continue to provide outpatient, intensive outpatient, and evaluations via telehealth. Please visit caron.org or contact your local regional resource director for the latest in our response and preparedness to ensure patients remain safe and healthy while receiving the utmost quality of care. And thank you again all for joining us, and have a great afternoon. So that concludes our formal presentation, but we did have some great questions, and if it's okay, we will stay on and take some time to answer those questions. If you need to go, if you X out, you will be taken to a survey that you can complete to receive your social work credit. And if you can stick around, fantastic. So we'll move on to the Q&A portion now. So first question we have is, are teens more informed today than other generations?
I would say absolutely. There's, especially in schools, a huge focus on health and wellness right now. And there are certain grade levels where they go very in depth with drug and alcohol. So I think that that's fantastic. I think we're doing a better job of encouraging open conversation at home. So yes, I think kids are certainly more informed now. And I think that that's part of the reason why we have some of the lower drinking rates. They kind of understand now a little bit more of the dangers of binge drinking. So I would say yes to that. But that, again, not letting schools have the full range of responsibility when it comes to having those conversations.
Great. So this I'm going to phrase as a multi-part question. The first question being, what are the signs that alcohol use is a problem in teens? But there was another question that I think overlaps, and it was, what technique do you use to intervene or on enabling parents, or if parents are in denial about their teens' use? So one, what are the signs and symptoms? And two, what are ways that we, mental health professionals, can help parents overcome the denial that their teen might have a problem?
Kate, do you want to take that? Because you did go through some of the signs and symptoms on one of those slides.
Yeah, I can start it and you can add to it. So when we look at signs and symptoms related to teen use, it is the symptoms that I had gone over on those slides, but also looking at change in mood, losses of time that, you expect them to be somewhere and all of a sudden they're not there, changes in sleep patterns that they are, there's times that they are not kind of accounted for. Change in friend groups, I think, is a big one, that their friend group you previously had known, and all of a sudden they're hanging out with new people that they're not necessarily bringing around as much. So I think that can absolutely be a factor. Having commitments that they're missing, having a shift at work and they're not there. Previous things that they valued, their values are starting to shift. They very much valued, playing on varsity sports, and all of a sudden it's not all that important anymore. Those are some of the things I think specific to teens that come to mind for me. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Christine.
The only other thing I was thinking is that, so many people are under the impression that in order to have a drinking problem, you have to be drinking every day. And that's certainly not true. So a lot of times when I'm doing assessments on kids, I'll find that, they don't drink all that often, or maybe it's a couple of times a month. But what they notice is every time alcohol enters their system, it's more and more and more. They don't have an ability to drink in moderation. They drink to the point of blackout, pass out every time. And that's obviously a concerning sign that somebody might have an alcohol use disorder.
And I think to answer the question, Adam, regarding how do you address parents who are struggling with enabling behaviors? And I think one of the things that I constantly think about going back to, because we really demand family engagement here in inpatient treatment when it comes to teen and any age group, to be honest, with treatment. And we get people that, the teen may see it's a problem, but the parents don't necessarily. And when we look at that dynamic, I think going back to goals is always something that's really important. What are the goals of the teen and what are the goals of the parent? The parent may identify that the goals are they need to get better grades to get into this college. That may be the goal. It may not be reduce drinking or stop drinking. But I think if we can look at aligning the goals and the struggles to obtain the goals with substance use, we need to really meet parents where they're at. Many times when we look at enabling, one of two things may be true. One, the fact that the teens' substance use is coming into question actually starts to make the parent question their own substance use, which can be threatening to them. And number two, I think another factor is the reality that many times when we talk about generational addiction, we do the best we can with what we know and we can do better. So I think educating parents on the truth about alcohol with some of the information that we have here, but also looking at the fact that we can acknowledge that there may have been some patterns that just aren't working for them. I think that's probably where I would start.
Great, thank you. I have another two-part question. And first, just in general, is it safe for parents of teens to have alcohol in their homes? And then the second part, which was a second question, is do we recommend alcohol-free homes if there's an adolescent that has been to treatment that is now returning to the home?
Kate, maybe you want to take that second part because you
Yep.
work more on the treatment side of people coming out. But in terms of having alcohol in the home, you know, I think that's okay as you're raising kids to have alcohol in the home, as long as it's in a place where it's locked up. If it's liquor, if it's beer, or you know, like your seltzer, your spiked seltzer, that you know exactly how much is in the fridge and you're monitoring it. I don't know that I would encourage you to have a very, you know, sophisticated bar setup where it looks like, you know, when you walk into your basement or your man cave, that it looks like, you know, the local pub. That might be a little bit too much of a focus while you have kids at home during the teen years, and make it really hard to kind of monitor what's going on there. But, you know, I think that can be part of healthy modeling, is if you have alcohol in the home, that it's there, but you take it or leave it, and you're aware of how much is there. Mm-hmm. You're monitoring it.
Yeah. Yeah. And the second part to that question, I think it's a really good one. So equate it to someone who has type 1 diabetes.
Kate, you're muted for some reason.
I'm not. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, no.
We lost you at type
Okay.
diabetes.
So sorry. So I think, you know, if you equate it to the idea of type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes, you're in a position where the what's in your pantry matters. And if I have a medical condition that puts me in a position where I'm more susceptible to having medical issues because of this, I would hope that I would have a family that would be supportive of that. So they know about what to do when it comes to grocery shopping, what is in the pantry. Does that mean that I can't eat a donut every so often? No, that doesn't mean that. But I think I have to be really careful about what is accessible. And if alcohol is that important, I have to question why. Why is alcohol that important for me that I have to have it in the home? If I choose to have it in the home, it should be locked up at all times. And again, we have to ask ourselves that if someone is struggling with a chronic progressive illness like alcoholism, how am I setting up my home environment to be the safest possible respite for them? And many times that's, let's not have alcohol in the home, because if we do, is alcohol that important that we need to have it there? Those are some of the questions that you really have to ask yourself.
Yeah, thank you. And one final question we have is, what treatments are available in lieu of residential treatment? I guess that could also be phrased as, you know, how do I know if my teen needs residential treatment? What should I do next if I think there might be a problem?
So I think the role of intervention is important. And many times when we think about intervention, we think about, you know, 20 people in your living room doing an intervention. That's not really what it's about. But the truth is, like we had talked about before, the symptoms of just being a teenager, the symptoms of having an alcohol problem and some mental health, they can overlap a lot. So it's confusing to look at it at times. It's important to make sure that we work with our teens for them to get a really good assessment. And if we know that there's a problem, or if we're unsure, I think looking into intervention for whether it's a residential assessment for a teen, if it's assessment on an outpatient basis, making sure that you have the right players on your treatment team is really important, right? So when I look at an outpatient provider that their experience is with teens with mental health and relational and substance use issues, I want to make sure that I'm in alignment with a mental health professional that's kind of on a team, that the goal is for us to understand what the problem is and then have adequate intervention. And Christine, you can add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I work in more of the early intervention portion of things through student assistance programs in school. So we do assessments in schools all the time on kids who maybe they violated the school's drug and alcohol policy. They came to school high, or they got caught, you know, drinking at a school sponsored event like prom or a football game. So we try to get a sense of where they're at with their substance use. And there are some things that can be handled even within a school environment. The school might be able to offer for kids that are more at mild to moderate risk for developing substance use disorder. They could use some sort of educational psychoeducational support, like maybe a program called Teen Intervene that's very motivational, interviewing focused, and set up to look at goals and how their potential alcohol use could be impacting their goals, taking a look at their triggers, and then coming up with alternatives to deal with that. So it doesn't always have to be intense treatment related, but it totally depends on how much, how often, and what the risk factors are with their alcohol. So that's why having a full assessment done to kind of take a look at all of those different pieces is advised.
Great. Well, thank you again, Christine and Kate, and I hope everyone will join us next week for our webinar as well. Just to reiterate, we will be sending an email with copies of the slides as well as a recording of the webinar and any links that were discussed so that you will have all of the information. Thank you to all those who joined us today and stayed with us through the Q&A, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.